Hey everyone. If we don't know each other already, my name is Scott Soltys Curry, and I am absolutely stoked to be speaking with you all today as part of Indie Design Week. It has been an awesome week for me, so I hope it has been for you. I hope you've been able to enjoy and learn and connect, and hopefully next year we'll all be vaxxed and ready to mingle in person. So who am I? Like I said, my name is Scott Soltys Curry. I am currently a senior product designer at Demandwell, which is a new high alpha company for a marketing tech. But also I am the founder of the Indianapolis Coffee Guide, which is why I am here. One of the reasons why I'm here talking with you today. So the Indianapolis Coffee Guide is a curated look into the amazing local coffee community in Indy. We reach coffee lovers through Instagram and iPhone app and our website. So the Coffee Guide started out as just kind of like a creative outlet and passion project, and has turned into this much bigger thing than I could have ever imagined. So 5 years ago, I was working at a terrible agency and needed a cool project to put on my portfolio to show off my web design skills. So I love coffee and local coffee, and my husband was actually working at a local cafe in Carmel at the time. So I decided to kind of like marry those two things. At the time, you could go onto Yelp and search local coffee, and it would return Starbucks. It would return Starbucks and Target, Starbucks and Kroger, Dunkin' Donuts, anywhere really that had coffee on the menu or in one of its reviews. So I decided to do something about it. And within 24 hours of starting the Instagram and buying the domain name, I had over a dozen different local roasters, cafes, and baristas reaching out saying, "Oh my gosh, who are you? What are you doing? How can I help?" It kind of proved right away that there was this unique need for something like this in the community. And I immediately had the support of the community, which was really awesome. So the Coffee Guide for the last 5 years has really been an opportunity for me to marry this, resource that the community needed with creative projects that I've always wanted to tackle. Like, I'm sure every single one of you on here today, has ideas. Like, I'm sure you have ideas in your head or in a notebook somewhere of, oh yeah, one day I want to design this or build this. These ideas that just allow us to create and design, just to literally create and design without inhibition or the restraints of work or, pesky clients getting in the way. So the Coffee Guide has really allowed me to explore some of those projects with a real purpose. So it's been this resource, and along the way, at one point I decided I really wanted to learn how to design and build an iPhone app. So I designed and built a free iPhone app. I wanted to learn different web technologies and work on different designs. So I, kept reiterating on the website. And most recently, we've actually designed and published a magazine, which is absolutely crazy. Because designing a magazine is hard. Creating a magazine is the hardest thing I've ever done, but it is infinitely rewarding. And I could give an entire talk about that, about the digital design, the physical design, financial design, content design, photography design, floral design, and I would be happy to, but I'll save that for the little Q&A after my little talk here. So feel free to stick around and we can talk about magazines and coffee. Side note, I also must scream from the rooftops that Ryan Hunley from Second Street Creative is an icon and a legend. Ryan was the art director for Batch, and it would not be nearly as beautiful as it is without his design and guidance and wisdom and just kindness and just all things that make him Ryan. I'm sure if you've ever worked with him, I'm sure you can agree. So for Batch, we worked with nearly 30 writers, photographers, florists, and designers, all kinds of people to pull it off. And it literally took a village. We do also have, we have very few copies of the magazine left. So stick around to the end of this. I have a little promo code for you if you want to, get your hands on a copy. So my goal with the Coffee Guide, besides learning new skills, has only ever been to get everyone to love local coffee as much as I do. And part of that is because I really just love local coffee, and our local community is amazing. I mean, the way they reached out to me at the beginning and just offered their support without even knowing me was great. And obviously, shopping local is infinitely important. But a huge part of it too, of that goal of getting everyone to love local coffee, is that local specialty coffee is just infinitely more sustainable than commercialized coffee. There's still a lot of room for growth, but I mean, it's just, in all aspects, it's just more sustainable. So that was kind of a long-winded introduction, but I kind of needed to set that stage for kind of like what we're going to talk about today, which is, why your latte is $7, designing a coffee ecosystem that's sustainable for everyone. So sustainability and just coffee education, and the two of those was a highly requested topic for this first issue of Batch, and I really wanted to include it. But as I started doing more and more research, there's just so much more to sustainability in coffee than I ever knew about. So I decided to push it to issue 2 so I could keep learning. And even putting this talk today together was a great exercise for me, because I am involved with specialty coffee so much that I kind of have like my blinders up, like I'm in my own little echo chamber. I just kind of assume that because I'm supporting local coffee and only local, that I'm doing my part. And doing this research has really opened my eyes. And I'm really excited to, kind of share some of that with you today, because it's something I'm obviously passionate about. And also just as a reminder that the decisions that we make as every day as consumers, but also as coffee drinkers, kind of directly impact the entire coffee ecosystem. So for the last 5 years, the specialty coffee scene has blossomed in Indy around the world, with some cities even much longer than that. Your Portland's, New York City, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago. But when I first started the Coffee Guide, there were maybe 12 local specialty shops on my list. And as of this week, with Certain Feelings opening in Ballworks and Tinker Coffee opening at AMP at 16 Tech, literally today, I hit my 50th cafe. And I've had even leave some cafes intentionally off of there. And many have closed over the years. Now we can get into that too in the Q&A if you want. So I say that because specialty coffee is becoming more accessible to us, but many parts of the coffee supply chain are becoming harshly imbalanced. So I kind of sought out to kind of help kind of answer if this imbalance is sustainable. So I'm sure most of you are coffee drinkers, know a million people who are, but with these things, we always have to lay kind of a baseline. So I wanted to kind of start with what coffee is, where it comes from, and what I mean when I talk about specialty coffee. So first, I'm just going to throw some high-level coffee stats at you, because who doesn't love some stats when you're giving a talk and presenting a little keynote? So first off, coffee is the second most traded global commodity in the world, behind crude oil. That's a big deal. Next, we consume nearly 600 billion cups of coffee every year, which is crazy if you factor in we have like 8 billion people in the world, and I'm sure less than half of us drink coffee. So, 600 billion divided by 4 billion is a lot of cups of coffee every year. And then also on a smaller scale, even though it is pretty big, there are 25 million small producers or farmers of coffee who use coffee as their main source of income, which is crazy, but also really awesome. So that's kind of the general quick stats of coffee. But I also keep talking about specialty coffee. So I want to dive into like what that is. So like, what is specialty coffee? Which is also referred to a lot as third wave coffee. So Rick Reinhardt, who was the executive director of the Specialty Coffee Association for 15 years, he defines specialty coffee as what you see here. So it's coffee from a known geographic origin that has a value premium above commercial grade coffee due to its high quality in the cup and to particular attributes that it possesses. So we can think of specialty coffee, whether it's the bean or the beverage, as being defined as differentiated coffee products that garner a premium to just commodity coffee products in the same market. So I know that's kind of like a textbook definition, so you kind of have to like drill into it a little bit, right? So the main pieces of it that make it specialty coffee is that it's from a known geographic origin. It's above commercial grade, so it's better than just what you find on the grocery store shelves. And it's also like, it's differentiated coffee products that garner a premium over this, those just like general commodity coffee products. So that's kind of the textbook definition. I kind of define specialty coffee in more of a human way. And I kind of define that as coffee you can trace from the farm to your cup, right? It's coffee that is a high grade or premium in the sense that it's just quality, right? Like it's not mass produced or over-engineered. So that's kind of, specialty coffee in a nutshell. So now I really want to get into it. I know you've obviously heard a lot about sustainability and design all week. So I'm going to take my own approach to this and kind of break this down into a couple different parts. And first, I want to talk about the whole journey of the coffee bean and how those systems are designed. So first, I want to talk about the production level, so the coffee farms, and then the consumption level, which is in the coffee shops. And then we'll talk about the community aspect and how our local coffee communities are or can be designed to be sustainable for themselves, but also to the whole coffee ecosystem. So the journey of the coffee bean. So for starters, coffee beans are actually seeds from a small fruit that are grown on coffee trees, right? So it literally is, a coffee bean is literally like the pit of a fruit. So coffee trees thrive in many different, but very specific climates that are only found in a few small regions around the world. So after farmers harvest their coffee beans, they work with a number of different entities to get their raw coffee beans shipped around the world, either through distributors, coffee co-ops, or sometimes directly to coffee roasters. Either way, eventually coffee beans end up in the hands of coffee roasters who spend a crazy amount of time analyzing each batch of beans. I mean, they test and test and test each roast until they come up with a specific flavor profile for the beans that is pleasing to the palate. Side note, if you ever get a chance to do a coffee cupping, I highly encourage it. There are a bunch of different local cafes and roasters that offer cuppings even now. There are lots of safety practices that they have in place, but I highly recommend them. They're a wonderful introduction to coffee for coffee drinkers, literally of all skill levels. I do them as often as I can, and I'm still learning. Okay, anyway, so after the roasting, coffee roasters then either sell their coffee beans to distributors or like businesses that are like coffee shops, or directly to consumers where the beans are ground up and brewed to perfection. So to review, we've got the coffee farmer who harvests raw green coffee beans. Then they get distributed out of a number of different ways that ends up with their roasters. And then from the roasters, it gets to the consumers, or which is, we buy the beans ourselves, or they're brewed for us at our favorite cafe. So taking a look at this journey, there are two kind of parts, like I said, that I want to talk about. First, we have like the global commoditization or the production of them, and then we have the local focus of it. So the roasters and the coffee shops that we get our beans from. So starting with the production of coffee beans, like I said, the coffee beans are, the pit of a fruit that's grown on a coffee tree. So as the coffee consumption and commoditization has skyrocketed, coffee as a product has been incredibly industrialized over the last century to keep up with this global demand. Large coffee producers are increasingly using technology just like any other major crop, and they're using innovation, big air quote innovation, to produce like a higher yield at a lower price, which again is, it's like any other major crop, right? So they also are engineering coffee to be grown in unnatural conditions and inundating the trees with like an egregious amount of chemicals, which in turn have like a direct negative impact on the communities that produce this coffee for us. Like, for example, I know it's not specific to coffee, right? But like the runoff and drainage from, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, aldicides, like heavily contributes to like deforestation and like harmful damage to local ecosystems and wildlife. And I mean, the chemicals also even have like a direct impact on the health of the farmers and the workers and the local communities. And again, it's like, it really, in the grand scheme of all this commoditization and the global takeover of these big coffee brands is really to get that higher yield and lower cost. And it's just this whole big thing, right? So the majority, if not all of these coffee farms are found in developing nations. And in no way are they like the farms you see in like northern Indiana on the way to Chicago. I mean, the living conditions in these countries are unlike anything in the US, right? So in thinking about this part of it, these large companies are just continuing to squeeze every last drop from these farms that have been forced for like one reason or another to industrialize to keep up with the global demands. And it's just not really sustainable. I mean, I guess in one way it's becoming more sustainable for like these global brands because they're still, air quote, innovating with new technologies, but really that's all. Like the farms are still paying that price because they're making less and less while also having to pay more and more for newer processing and growing equipment and industrial farming. And that's a whole big thing that we're not going to get too much into today. But so the main purchasers of these commercialized coffee beans are your big commercial coffee companies, are your Starbucks, your Dunkin' Donuts, Folgers, Maxwell House, etc. It's not the specialty coffee shops that we visit and work from. So speaking of specialty coffee shops, let's hop to the second part of that and talk about the local focus and the consumption of it. So a big buzzword with specialty coffee is this idea of like single origin or fair trade coffee. And that's one of the big differentiators here from the global consumption versus like the local specialty consumption. So your big brands don't typically include the country or like the origin of their coffees or where they come from. And if they do, it literally is just a marketing tactic where they might mention one singular country to sound more like a local specialty coffee shop. Whereas the focus on specialty coffee kind of began because, like a handful of local coffee lovers realized the impact of this commercialization on having the coffee farms, the farmers, and the environment. So they local coffee roasters and baristas and coffee professionals wanted to take some of that power away from the global brands and put it back into the hands of farmers and in turn produce a premium product. So with single origin, these beans have a much shorter and a much more traceable path that I was talking about from farm to cup. It weeds out a lot of the middlemen and large companies because a lot of specialty coffee roasters, not all of them either purchase beans directly from specific farms or from co-ops or small distributors that work directly with farms. So literally the chain has very few links in it, which means, with any short supply chain, right, that everyone along the way is able to provide more value, they have more valuable input, and they're able to charge and pay more premium prices. So, and also for the sake of community, it builds tighter knit relationships. So, some of our favorite coffee roasters in Indy directly communicate and often visit with smaller family-run farms in developing nations across the world. So because of this, shorter supply chain, we as coffee drinkers get a more premium product, but also the supply chain is just naturally more sustainable for the farmers and the distributors. So kind of very briefly, I know I'm running through a lot, but that's kind of where we are on the production side of the coffee bean journey. The commercialization of coffee for global brands has become sharply imbalanced in favor of the global brands, right? And in turn is becoming less and less sustainable for the coffee farms, which is obviously not ideal. Whereas for specialty roasters, they were like kind of born out of this desire and designed to combat that over commoditization in order to create a more sustainable ecosystem for everybody. So speaking of the local roasters and shops, that's the next part I want to look at, right? Like the sustainability and design of local cafes and roasters and where we literally get our coffee. So when we talk about sustainability in local cafes, we really have to think about it in two parts. We have the products and then we have the people. So there's been a lot of talk over the last decade about the sustainability of coffee shops and their products and waste. And like the two big pieces that have gotten a lot of airtime over the last few years have been straws and paper cups. I mean, notoriously, 2018 was the year of the straw and like the big reckoning at Starbucks and coffee brands across the world. And there was, and there's been like a huge impact on that, right? Like, I don't know the last time I was actually given a straw at a coffee shop because they, have come up with new designs for lids and carriers and all sorts of things to kind of negate the use for straws. The cups. Like coffee shops famously like hand our beverages to us in paper cups. And I could go down the whole rabbit hole of like paper production and waste, but I will mention that most paper cups are actually made of mostly paper. They almost all have plastic linings that are basically impossible to separate from the paper, rendering them almost entirely unrecyclable or compostable. Even the compostable cups that have popped up over the last few years still have a small plastic layer that only a few recycling centers handle. So really like most of the cups, even if they are, built to be compostable or recyclable, most of them still end up in the landfill, which is not really sustainable. So those are the two pieces that have gotten a lot of attention over the last few years. But a recent study by 7 Miles Coffee Roasters in Australia with their Coffee Science and Education Center, they found that paper cups and straws are actually responsible for only a small margin of the environmental impacts that local cafes have and their sustainability. So they found that the energy required to power a shop, specifically the incredibly high power it takes to constantly heat, water, and steam milk, is far more substantially impacting their sustainability on an impact on the environment. What's crazy, and which I didn't think about, but which makes total sense, is milk is also a really close second with the amount of methane and water it takes to produce a gallon of milk, but also in, like the milk waste throughout the day. But again, that's a different conversation that we can have on a different day. All that being said, cafes are, because they're, small local cafes, because they are, they have their hand in everything and everything that they do. They're not relying on, global chains to determine like what they do with everything in their day-to-day life. Cafes are able to design better ways to combat like the waste aspects of their business and the power consumption. For example, the rise in milk alternatives in coffee shops over the last few years has been a huge move forward, as dairy-free alternatives have like a much lower environmental impact, like oat milk, for example. Packaging is also like a huge piece of the puzzle. Cafes like Amberson locally deliver every single one of their drinks in glass jars that are, recyclable, like traditionally, and you're recycling at home, or by bringing them back into the cafe to be, cleaned and used again. And you also get a small discount off of your next drink. And then also roasters like Tinker Coffee are packaging their coffee beans in compostable bags that are truly compostable. actually buried a Tinker coffee bag in my garden at the beginning of last year, and it's almost completely unrecognizable. There's just like barely any shards left, which is, really, really cool. So that's like a really high level looked at the product and like the business impact of sustainability. The other half of that is the specialty coffee's impact on local communities. So local specialty coffee shops offer a premium product, as we discussed, but which also naturally makes their products higher than traditional chains. And with that, there's a huge conversation always around gentrification that's been happening for decades, which again is a topic worthy of a much larger conversation. But one way cafes and many of our local cafes that they're trying to impact our communities directly is by actively working to pay their employees livable and, like traditional, like career-like wages, right? So for a lot of us, the idea of working in a coffee shop is something for like a high school student or a college student, right? It's just like a part-time job to make extra money. But in reality, like nearly every other country treats their baristas and coffee professionals or like as coffee professionals, like allowing anybody really to create an actual sustainable career in coffee that's more than like a small side job. Again, Amberson is doing a really great job at this. I think their cheapest drink is like $6 or $7, and they don't accept tips because they want to charge a premium price for their products so that they can, pay their employees an actual livable wage without having to rely on tips. And that's just like baked into their system, right? And also so that they can afford the higher end premium coffee that directly impacts the coffee farms around the world. So when you talk about specialty shops, third wave shops, single origin coffees, they're really not buzzwords that people are just trying to use to dupe you to get you to pay more. Like these words are used intentionally. They just mean that the cafe has designed their programs around their products in a way that it's meant to support the sustainability of local coffee. So to kind of like wrap up, because there's just so many things to say about, local coffee and sustainability. So to wrap up, we went over the few big aspects, right? We went over the commercial production, the specialty single origin production, and how those are different, and how the global one is not really sustainable, but how this local specialty smaller farm productions are much more sustainable. And then we talked about how local coffee is adapting to our ever-changing world and trying to maintain a business while also, sustain a workforce and just products and spaces for everyone. So for the most part, it's pretty easy how we as individual consumers can impact the commercial production. And we can do that by supporting local specialty coffee roasters instead of big chains whenever we can. This means going just a few extra steps to not grab, the commercial Folgers coffee off of the grocery shelf, and instead like grabbing coffee from a local roaster, which might I also suggest a local service like Indie Coffee Box, which delivers 1, 2, or 3 freshly roasted bags of coffee to your doorstep every month, which you can read more about in Batch Magazine, but also at indiecoffeebox.com. And for the second part, we can really, as consumers and us, right, we can impact the sustainability of coffee from the cafe all the way down to the farm by supporting local cafes and learning about what they do, how they do it, and why they do it. Okay, so I know that's a lot of information. I've obviously had a lot of coffee today, but there's just a lot to talk about, right? Because there is a lot of information and there's just so much to talk about. So if you have any questions, I'm going to hop over to the Q&A room, and I'm happy to talk more about coffee literally all day long. And if you would like to get a copy of Batch, you can head to batchmag.com, where you can use the code IDW2021 to get 20% off or 25% off a magazine that I'll be shipping out as soon as you place your order. So thank you so much for listening to my long-winded talk about coffee and sustainability, and honestly, like why our lattes cost $7 and why I'm super happy to continue paying that. So so enjoy the rest of your the talks today, and let's get a cup of coffee.